This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Tuesday, May 8th, 2018. That means it's Google I.O. Day 1. And I'm here with Michael Josh of GadgetMatch. It's the end of the day, actually.
Yes.
And we're going to tell you everything we saw at Google I.O.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a long day, but there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. And so what's super exciting to me is not only are we going to talk about I.O., but you have a G7 review unit. And mine is in the mail. I just got confirmation of the tracking number. So, I don't have as much to say about it as you do, but I'd love to talk about it. And some reviews have been published already in Gadget and a few others. So I would love to hear your take. We talked about it last podcast with my guest, but I want to hear your take.
So, LG, the expectations aren't as high. For me at least, where I'm concerned, I know they make great phones, but they've had some flaws over the last few years, and they haven't really blown me away. And I think the G7 may not be super spectacular, but what I wrote in my hands-on that it ticks off all the boxes, and they really have really gone back to building a phone that focused on fundamentals. So it looks good. It does most of the things that we want it to do, and they've really improved the camera. And I've used it. I was in a short holiday in Venice Beach, so I took a lot of photos over the last 4 or 5 days, and the photos have come out really, really well. Even the low light photos. Yeah,
and that's I think that's the takeaway for me is that I think there's a lot of disappointment in the initial hands-on publications.
Yeah,
and we did talk about it last week. Narav was on my show, and, we felt like it was very meh, but I don't want people to, the reason I think it's meh is simply because where can you go today, right? Like, it's really hard.
Exactly.
And there's a few key little things that I feel that LG did to hit a price point, probably to satisfy the carriers, not because LG is trying to be cheap.
Right. But
the US carriers, are a real pain in the butt.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we're seeing maybe just 4 gigs of RAM, and the 3,000 milliamp hour battery, which seems to be a little bit on the low side. I think that's a combination of them needing extra space for that that speaker system. Right. They needed a bit of a cavity in there. But I also think it's in part because it's cheaper. And so, carriers, I have a feeling we don't know the price yet. Like, it's funny that reviews are out, we don't know the price yet.
Right, which is why I haven't also put out my review yet.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I wouldn't be surprised if it comes in at around $650 US.
I think that's a good price for it.
And honestly, if you look at the new OnePlus, whenever it's coming, is probably going to be around, I figure, less than 600, probably 550-ish. And it's similar in specs. It has more RAM. Probably, we can assume it's 8 gigs, right?
Yes.
But I think that, that's kind of the niche product that you can't get on a CDMA carrier, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So it's not going to be as mainstream. But considering how expensive the flagship have become, $650 is actually a pretty decent price. And if you look at what you're getting for that kind of money, I think the G7 is spot on.
An affordable flagship. And I think for most, us techies, and sometimes I think you raise a really good point. Us techies, us tech journalists, partly it's our fault because we look for the hype. We look for the excitement. We need something to talk about, to write about. But when you really think about it, how we really set our expectations too high, so much so that we're like, meh, it's just a boring phone. I said the same thing about the S9. I called it boring. But at the same time, I do think there is space for an affordable flagship because for most users, they're not willing to spend $800 to $1,000 on a smartphone, even if it's subsidized with a carrier plan.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
The thing to me that makes the G7 probably, I haven't played with it, but you've already talked about the camera, is that I think a lot of people are often not seeing how good LG's cameras are.
Right.
Like, I think they're not nearly as foolproof as an iPhone or a Galaxy, or a Pixel, where you just mash the button and magic happens, right? But I think that the customizability of it, especially for video recording and stuff, a lot of people just don't seem to like take that into account.
A lot of my friends love the wide angle feature. And if you're traveling, it's nice to be able to have your regular shot, but also a really wide angle shot.
And I think they're the only one that, I mean, Moto did the wide angle on I think the X4 last year, but they were like, it was a one-off thing.
There are hardly
Whereas every LG since the G5 has had the wide angle in some way or another. And I think that's a huge feature. I knew it wasn't going to happen with the G7, but if I had to make my ideal smartphone from LG, I would want 3 lenses, a tele, which they don't have,
right?
A regular, and the wide angle,
right?
And that would be kind of the killer combo for me.
I was hoping for that actually.
Yeah,
in the P20
but I didn't think it was going to happen with the G7. Oh, for the P20,
right? When I saw 3 cameras, because we've been talking for the longest time. We do want zoom. We do want ultra wide angle.
Totally. So I think honestly, that's kind of like. I think people are going to be happy with the camera.
Yes.
And it's gotten much better in auto mode from my little bit of time that I spent with it.
Yeah, we were out drinking, Joshua and I, Vergara of Android Authority, we were out at this, really dim, chill bar. Mm-hmm. And we took a lot of like low light photos and they turned out pretty well. And the selfie camera, which was a big pain point on the V30, is pretty decent now, so it's usable. So
I think they're binning pixels, right?
They're binning pixels for the low light shots,
right?
And so I did shoot like this really low light shot last night, and they came out pretty well. So I'm happy. I think for the most part, if it's a photo that you can post on social media and that you'll be happy with sharing, I think that's a sign of a good camera.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the fact that the sensor, as you kind of implied, on the wide angle is the same as the sensor on the main camera, means you're going to get better photos from the wide angle no matter what. Right. And it was never terrible. Right. But, it's a little bit more limited in low light because f/1.9, although that's pretty good for a wide angle, but it's not as good as f/1.6. Right.
Because as a user, you shouldn't have to worry about this, right?
No, you shouldn't have to worry about it.
If you give me 2 cameras, I just want to, I'll choose whatever fits the purpose, and the quality should be the same.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think people, from my bit of experience, and based on my past experience with G6 and V30 and prior LG phones, I think there's a lot of quality to be extracted from that camera, and perhaps LG's finally made it a bit more mashable, button mashable proof.
Right.
And I'm still not convinced on the AI mode. I don't know how much you've shot on the AI mode.
Neither am I.
But I've turned it off on my P20 Pro, for example, because it's just useless.
I don't think I need it.
I don't need it
and
because
it complicates
if I really
things.
want to make it a little more fancy and more personalized, I'll much rather use the Vivid mode on the P20 Pro, to be honest with you,
right?
Or manual controls if I really wanted to play with things,
right?
Than the AI, and I think it's because I'm an experienced photographer like you are. But I think for a lot of people, the AI might come in handy,
right?
I do think that this low light mode, which is new to the G7, the binning part on the main camera, is I think going to be pretty good for a lot for
Yeah, I didn't really use the AI mode much. In fact, I basically ignored it most of the time. Yeah, it is what it is.
I think most people are gonna leave it on and gonna be happy. But I think that the nice thing is you can grow with that camera, right?
Because if you want to apply the filters, you can still do that in post, right? When you're on Instagram, pick a filter. So it's not necessarily game-changing, dramatically improving the quality of the photos you take. If that were the case, then I would dive in to use AI. It's just sad because that is a big talking point of the phone itself. It's a big marketing. I mean, the branding itself, LG G7 ThinQ.
Yeah.
Right? So
I don't like that name at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's their AI branding, but I just don't understand, why they picked such a goofy name. And now they're putting on everything from fridges to phones. But, I like the fact that the G7 is one of those phones that I think it hits all the basics very well. Especially if it's in the price range we expect, it's going to be a pretty good choice especially for people who are, I said, on CDMA networks or are just more comfortable walking to a carrier store rather than buying something online from OnePlus or whatever. And they'll be well served and they'll spend less money than a Galaxy and still get a really good phone.
It will be an easy phone to recommend.
And it's a phone that can grow with them because, maybe they'll use AI at first on the camera and then they'll turn it off and start using some of the more advanced features. And who knows, maybe they'll become vlogger pros and use the manual mode for video, right? Which is on there. And I think, they have all these options with audio. There is a decent sounding speaker.
It's loud.
It's very clear. That's the biggest thing. I think loud is fine. Lots of people have done loud, but clear and loud is much harder. I mean, the Zenfone 5, you were at the briefing MWC with me, right?
Yes.
Where they were going on about how the speaker is so loud, but honestly, to me, it sounded like crap.
It's loud, but not
clear.
Not clear.
Right.
The quality isn't great. Yeah.
And so with the G7, we've got, the quad DAC, we've got 3.5 millimeter, we've got aptX, HD, and a bunch of other codecs.
It has a lot going for it.
So again, people can choose their level of audio performance that they want, whether it's listening through Bluetooth or going all out with some fancy headphones, and it can grow with them. And the display, I'm prefer OLED, honestly, but I have to say that is one of the nicest LCD panels.
It's a bright LCD.
I mean, it's not just the brightness. It's just, I think it's good.
Yeah.
And it's Quad HD, which you don't get that much right now. A lot of the flagships, like OnePlus has been doing, and I don't know if they're going to do that again with the 6, but they've done 1080p. Huawei's done 1080p. It's really only like Pixel, Samsung, and LG that are doing Quad HD displays.
Right.
And I don't think most people can tell the difference.
Yeah, I don't think they will.
But I do think that it's nice. It's nice to know that you've got that extra resolution.
A good display is always important for me, and sometimes you may not notice it, but it's what you look at. It's what you look at when you lift up your phone. So people deserve a good display on a phone.
And I think another thing that I think people are going to start to love on this phone, and I fell in love just in a few minutes I had it, was the Google Assistant button. Yeah. Because look, saying, I'm not going to say it because I don't want everybody to trigger, but saying the trigger word for Google Assistant is nice, but sometimes you just need to push a button. And squeezing the phone has just never done it with me. I still haven't enabled my Pixel because I'm hoping that eventually I'll get comfortable with it. The reality is that I should just turn it off because most of the time when it happens, it's because I don't want it to. And when I do want it, I don't get it, and it's just a bad idea. I'm not saying that, having a phone that can detect squeezes is necessarily a bad thing, but I'm not sure we found a use case. It seems, I felt it was gimmicky when the U11 introduced it, and I still feel it's gimmicky on the Pixel.
Agreed.
And I think having a hard button, I wish it was reprogrammable, but at least you can turn it off, and it's way better than a Bixby button, right?
It is. Google, I'm a fan of Google Assistant. That's my personal assistant of choice. But also just having to not force another unpolished, unfinished personal assistant on us, right? But giving us a robust personal assistant that works. And not having to reinvent the wheel. Like, you don't have to make one. Just use what's already out there. And I think this whole AI machine learning space, it needs to stay open because you need input from all these third parties. If you try to create this closed system that's your own, I don't think you're going to be able to survive this space.
I honestly feel like, I know it's not going to happen, and I have an iPhone 10, and I think it's a great phone, but I honestly feel like Siri is a waste of my time. And I wish that Apple would allow you to just replace it with whatever assistant, even if it's Alexa, for example.
But actually, what I would have loved too is, like, in the spirit of openness, maybe they gave us an option for those people who do like Alexa to use that as the personal assistant, right?
Which HTC did on the U11, which was kind of cool.
Right.
So anyway, overall,
just one more thing: the battery. Yeah. Even if it's 3,000, at least in my 1 week of use, I've been able to last a whole day and then some. So it's not that bad.
My guess was going to be that you're going to be able to run a day no problem, but it wasn't quite going to live up to the S9 Plus and the
Huawei's.
The Huawei's are a whole different ballgame because their batteries are much bigger.
Yeah.
But I'm talking like Pixel 2 XL.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what OnePlus does there with their battery size because they've always been a little on the skimpy side. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being better than the LG because that's really 3,000 is
it's not a lot.
Pretty small today.
It's not very generous. Yeah.
So I think there is some reasons to be potentially negative in the sense that we don't know the price yet,
right?
And I do feel 4 gigs is a little bit low for a flagship today. Now, I understand that Samsung has a 4 gig flagship with the basic S9. So, again, the V series is more like the higher end version. So maybe I should look at, forward to the whatever the V40 or the V35, whatever it is called, brings to the table. But I feel like there is some reasons to be concerned. And the colors, the blue one and the pink one, are really gorgeous in the sun, it turns out.
In the sun. I saw the raspberry rose up close today. I have the Moroccan blue one. In the sun, it looks pretty cool. Right now, in the dark, it's a little bit...
Yeah. It's interesting, because I felt at the briefing, you actually were at the SF briefing too.
Yes.
Because you're not based in San Francisco, so it was kind of cool to see you there. And I felt like it was... very meh, the design. Like, nothing wrong with it. It's a nice...
Because we were shooting the gray,
the
silver...
gray and the black one. So it's an evolution of the G6 design and a bit of a blend between the V30 and the G6, right?
Yes.
And those are not ugly phones, and I think they're fine.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stand out. It seemed pretty generic in design, and I think that's simply because they didn't really let us handle the blue and the pink as much, and we certainly didn't take them outside because today at Google I/O in the sun, there were a lot of LG G7 from the various reviewers.
Yes.
And the pink rose red one and the blue Moroccan blue looked awesome in daylight.
Yep.
Like that really suddenly stood out, kind of like the Huawei P20's twilight color stands out. And so maybe we were a little too harsh on the meh, boring design because the end, with the right color, this phone actually looks okay.
Even the silver one that we shot in San Francisco, I think because I had a silver V30 as well, I think we really like the V30's design.
Yeah.
And I think, having seen LG's design evolution over the last few years, the experiments, the all sorts of...
the G5,
the G5. It's nice of them to kind of find a sweet spot which they feel is their signature look and kind of stay in that realm of design.
Yeah, and I think you can't be critical of the fact, like, the other thing is, like, how can you radically reinvent a smartphone today? I mean, this phone has everything in it that's, the latest thing, like a notch, for better or for worse. You can turn it off. It has it checks all the boxes in terms even of design, like glass sandwich, cool color schemes.
Feels good too.
So what else can you ask for? Like, I think people had these weird expectations of LG, but I think it's also LG's doing. You see, they remember to kind of showed people behind closed doors at MWC what was a prototype of the G7.
Yes.
And they said that the messaging was, we're rethinking what the G7 is going to be. And so that's why we haven't launched it yet. Right. So I think a lot of us were like, okay, they decided to, really break away from the past here somehow.
Right.
And then we get this, which is totally not that. It's totally like an evolution of their design language and in the specs we expect. So I think that they shot themselves in the foot. Maybe there was something lost in translation in the execution of their message there. But I'm looking forward to what they're doing with the next V series. I hope they do a V series, and I hope it's 3 cameras. I hope it has a tele, a regular, and a wide. And I hope that, they push the envelope maybe with the display by going double notch or something crazy like that. Or maybe do a notch like the iPhone, where the bottom does not have a chin at all. Right. Because their chin is very small on the G7, but every Android phone with a notch has a bit of a chin, and I just don't understand why. Apple can make one without a chin.
Because Apple has that
they have
display
money
that curves underneath.
Exactly,
right?
but LG makes displays. Come on, guys.
Right.
So I'm kind of hoping they can wow us a little more with the V40 or V35 or whatever, and give us more RAM, a bigger battery.
Right. And I think that's what the trend's going to be. So the V will be the showcase of what they can do, priced a little bit more because it costs more.
And the G will be the mainstream.
is the more mainstream product, which is
And I think that's kind of where that's where it's at, really.
Yeah, I think it's where they need to be as well. I think for LG to stay alive and to stay relevant, I think they did a good job this year.
I think it's okay. Yeah. And so that brings us to I/O. I think I want to talk about it more. We have a lot of little topics to cover. We've got about 18 minutes in the show, so we've got about 45 minutes to go, and I think there's enough topics to fill those 45 minutes.
There's a lot to talk about,
What do you want to start with? Let's talk about Android P. I think that's probably the biggest one, right? Mm-hmm. So what's your take? I mean, there's a lot of stuff we knew about because there was already an alpha version out there that people were using. We
can now talk about it in detail more because the beta
was
is officially announced
available
today. It was dropped today, and it's pretty interesting because not just for Pixel phones, there was a whole range of
including the upcoming OnePlus.
Yep. OnePlus, Oppo, Vivo, Nokia.
Thank you. One more Essential.
an essential.
Which is really cool.
So if you have any of those phones, all you have to do is to go to android.com/beta to see if your phone is one of those phones that can get that update. But we immediately downloaded the update onto our phones today. I installed it on my Pixel, so I also had some time to play around with it.
So what's your takeaway?
I think there are a lot of really nice, nifty things going on to make it easier for you to use your phone. I really like this feature where you can they call it slices. And some apps, for example, the demo that that they showed me today was the Lyft app. So from search, a lot of times that's the first thing when we're looking for something, we just type in the name of an app. I do that a lot. I don't even look for it anymore. You type in Lyft, and instead of just seeing the app icon, you can also get certain slices of actions that you can do. So if it knows, you can say book a lift to home, book a lift to work. And so you can quickly dive into the tasks that you need to do. So I think I do like that. It's simplifying the tasks that we do on a regular basis, not having to dive into too many menus, pressing a lot of buttons, saving time. That was really good. In terms of actions, the phone is supposed to be smart enough to figure out what actions you're about to do next. That if it works, that sounds pretty cool. And there's some nice interface changes. Some will say, for sure, I can hear them now. Similar, they copied the iPhone. I'm sure because there's this. How on the iPhone you can swipe from left to right to switch between open apps. So you can kind of do that now. So the multitasking window looks a little bit iPhone-esque because instead of how back right now you kind of just scroll through them like a list of cards vertically.
Right, so this is
but you don't really see what's in the app. Now they're still vertical, but you swipe from left to right.
Well, that's what I mean. You used to swipe vertically, now you swipe sideways.
Yes, and you can see the whole app.
It's interesting because they're no longer snapshots of the app. The app is almost like the Palm Pre back in the day where the app is kind of running. Yeah. And you can see it run. I'm excited about the gestures because honestly that's one of my favorite things on the iPhone X. Yeah. And so far I think, this is a little lower quality in terms of execution and fluidity of the experience. Yeah. But at the I got to see, I'm not going to get into detail, but I got to see a newer version of that. Yeah. And I can't say how, but I did, and it felt much smoother. So there's some improvements that are going to be coming to this gesture system in terms of its execution, so that it's closer to what we've experienced with Apple. And honestly, Apple nailed it. I feel that part of the reason to me I never want to go back to an iPhone with a home button now after using an iPhone X is because the gestures are so it just feels so natural. Right. And it's almost like muscle memory. Right. I was going to say within seconds.
Well, the issue there too is that for most users, it may be a little bit complicated because you're going to have to relearn certain things. Right. Because even today, I was like, I was swiping. I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do. I wasn't doing exactly what I wanted to do. And that was the same experience with the iPhone. I think muscle memory, it took a few days before muscle memory kicked in.
But you can turn it off, right?
Right. You can turn it off. So
you can go back to the regular buttons. And to be clear, the little kind of like pill-shaped bar at the bottom, which is the gesture area, is complemented by a back button. You need a back button for Android, so there's a back button on the left of it.
And it's turned off by default.
The back button is off by default.
The pill-shaped button, which you use to swipe between open apps. We were looking for it, and we thought our beta was not working properly, but apparently you have to go in and turn it on. And turn it on, yeah. But I always say, when they roll out a new feature, give it a shot. Deal with the pain for the first few days because it's there for a purpose. Yeah, absolutely. And once you get the hang of it. So I really like that.
I'm going to take it for a spin because I like it on the iPhone. And I also feel like, I've tried it and it's not quite as slick as the iPhone, but it's definitely slicker than, for example, I feel than the OnePlus implementation that they had, I think, on their beta on the 5T or something. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that there's definitely a big change. Interestingly enough, one of the other rumors that Android P would supposedly bring, and we would hear potentially at I/O, was the notch support, but they never mentioned anything about notch support.
Nope.
Which is really interesting. But the gestures was a rumor that came to be, very clearly true. And I think it's done right. It's done pretty well. And then, of course, you talked about the slices and a bunch of the other features. What other things? There's a lot of stuff in
There's
P.
a lot of stuff. There was a word that was repeated over and over by Sundar Pichai himself, digital well-being.
Oh, right.
And they basically talk about it as one of the pillars of Android P. And it's very interesting because basically it's just a new way of thinking, right? Because you want to be able to, we are so tied to our devices and we use these devices as tools for every day, but they want you to be able to, the same device that sucks you in is able to kind of help you strike that balance so that you also live in the real world and have a real good life as well outside of the technology space.
Yeah,
so a lot of features there.
Yeah, some of the things that they talked about was you can tell Google Assistant when you want to go to bed, and like some time before that, it goes into Do Not Disturb automatically.
So they call it wind down mode?
Wind down, yeah.
Yes.
And then there was... and it goes black and white, right?
It goes black and white so that it doesn't stimulate your brain. Maybe turn you off from watching a YouTube video. That was cool.
What else was there?
There's a shush feature, which is also like Do Not Disturb. But if you turn your phone around
that's right.
on the table, it won't vibrate. Notifications won't come in for that period unless you set an emergency contact. Yeah.
And it's cool because you don't have to manage Do Not Disturb anymore. You don't have to turn it on or off. You just flip your phone over with face down, so glass down, and boom, you're done for a while.
There's also the Android dashboard. And what I really like about it is, how when you have kids and you limit their time and there are apps that so that basically after their 1 hour of computer or internet use is over, the phone just deactivates.
Yeah.
So there's this feature now almost for adults and for us to say, hey, I'm only going to spend, maybe I have a game that I like to play, I'll give myself an hour a day. And when your hour is up, it'll tell you. And then the app will just go grayscale. It'll still work, but it'll kind of remind you, okay, you're done for the day. You've hit your quota for the day.
I think it's going to be useful to some people, and I feel it's cool that they spent the time and energy, and it seems to be really well thought out, which I think is really nice. The user experience seems to be solid. I personally, have no trouble with putting my phone away whenever I need to put my phone away. So I'm not sure I would benefit, and I'm always asking myself, how can people not have the discipline to just say, I'm going to bed now?
Sorry.
It's hard for you?
It's hard for me.
Yeah.
I spend sometimes 2-3 hours awake. Still, even when I'm exhausted.
When you're exhausted.
And so it's at the end of the day, it's all a personal choice.
For sure.
And it's just nice that they're pushing almost a revolution of some sort.
It's nice to have tools to help. For sure.
Yeah.
What else? Let's see. We've talked about some of the core Android P features. So we talked about the gestures, digital well-being. Those are the big pillars of P, right?
So yeah, intelligence, simplicity, and digital well-being. In terms of intelligence, there's also, we didn't talk about the adaptive battery.
Oh, right.
And adaptive brightness. These are features that we've seen from a lot of Android smartphone manufacturers, but it's nice for it to be built into the operating system. So using machine learning, it can optimize app usage, how much apps drain energy, which apps stay open. But we've seen these features. Huawei does.
But they've been add-ons. Like this is in the OS now, which is great. And I think the takeaway for me was, the thing I thought was really cool is that it'll detect apps that seem to be overusing certain features and kind of like limit their access so that your battery doesn't go cray-cray.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. I think it's cool. It'll be interesting to see how much of an impact it has for the average user on their battery life with the same device. I think that's what I'm looking forward to seeing the most. And we should really, it'll probably go out of beta, in the August or something like it always does, right?
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah.
But anything that gives us more battery life, I'm in.
Especially since battery technology has not improved.
Especially since LG put a 3,000 milliamp hour
But even
battery in the
Samsung with their
G7.
battery capacity,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, sure, optimization is great, but give me both, right?
Right,
Give me
absolutely.
optimization and a bigger battery. Those two put together will give me a really long battery. Theoretically.
The P20 Pro now has a 4,500 milliamp hour battery with this technology.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's cool.
So yeah, I think that's basically one last thing. Before we move on, Android P. We're still guessing, right? They did not announce a name.
The name, oh yeah, let's talk about
They
that.
didn't announce a name, but 1 year ago, we were here at the press room at Google I/O, and there are a lot of snacks, scattered around, and there were just tons of Oreo. And I think for a lot of us, last year, we were like, is this a clue? Is this a clue? And we joked about it. I even did a video, and a lot of us were saying, maybe because there's just so much Oreo everywhere, it's going to be called Oreo, and it did. So today, first thing I did at the press room, I went through all the snacks, looking for clues, anything that was P. And
you
sure
found
enough,
one.
I did find something, dried pineapple. So maybe it will be called. And then the funny thing is the label says fruit for thought.
Yeah, I know.
So I was like,
I
are
know.
they trying to? Is that a hint? Will it be pineapple?
If that ends up being a hint, that's a really, really clever little Easter egg that they
Right?
threw on us.
Yes, because fruit for thought.
I know.
And pineapple. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's all
I don't
kinds
mind.
of thoughts. Whether parfait is one, peppermint.
Yeah, there's a lot of options actually this time
Man.
around. But I would love to hear what people think or people want Android P to be
Yeah.
called.
I don't know. I mean, they're already at P. It's going to take a few more years, but we're going to be at the end very soon.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those pastries are going to be difficult to.
Yeah, XYZ.
Yeah.
This is going to be really difficult.
Maybe by then it'll be like OS 10.
They'll stop at
Mac
X.
OS and it started being named after landmarks in California.
Yeah.
Like Yosemite and
Yep.
Mavericks and all that. Yeah, I mean the cats was cool in OS 10. I liked the cats. I kind of felt they could have gone on a little longer with the cats, but hey.
I like the naming game, and I just love. There's just so much. There's so many different elements to this. What does the statue look like?
Right.
That's at Google at Google HQ, and then the graveyard that gets after a new release is announced. All of that is kind of cool. It adds to the whole, and I think people love to guess every year. So I hope they keep up this.
I mean, it's whimsical, and I think that's what Google does well,
Yes.
And obviously Apple's done a bit of that too, but I think Google really does it well.
Yes.
And Android is kind of still a little nerdy because of all of that stuff. Especially, this is a developer conference. It's all about being nerdy and dorky, right?
Yeah. But there's a lot of that in the air at Google I/O. The whole experience and the quirkiness of it all.
Absolutely. All right, let's see. What else do we have here? You want to talk about the Google Lens stuff we saw? Because that was pretty cool. So there was a lot of talk about AI.
Right.
Some of it was kind of like more pie in the sky, or like, we're like new cloud-based server architecture and stuff for AI.
Yep.
I mean, stuff that doesn't impact us directly.
Yep.
But there was also a lot of practical examples of some products that have benefited from Google's AI expertise. And they showed a new version of Google Lens, or at least maybe an upcoming version. I mean, who knows?
I think it's an upcoming version.
I'm pretty sure it's an upcoming version. And there were many little things they showed, and I can't remember them all. But the one that struck for me was they took a photo, or they were pointing at some text on paper, like
let's just say a menu,
printed text, a menu, and you could highlight the words.
You could copy paste.
And you can copy paste directly from the photo as if it was text.
I love the way they said it. You can copy and paste from the real world into the digital world.
That's right.
How crazy is that, right? That definitely was one of the highlights for me of that Google Lens. And just for those of you at home who don't know what Google Lens is, it's basically being able to turn on your camera app and point it at an object and get answers. It's supposed to be, answering questions that you might have, right? So some of the other examples pointed at a breed of dog, it'll tell you what breed the dog is. Pointed at a building, it'll tell you what that building is, give you information about that building, and all these kind of stuff. But that was pretty cool, that copy pasting feature.
Yeah, that was really impressive. And then they showed the ability to, I'm trying to think what else was part of that Lens package. I don't think that was necessarily part of the Lens package, but there was also the ability to turn documents you take photos of into PDFs.
Right.
That are actually like OCR PDFs,
right.
like real, like usable for something, not just like a black and white version of the photo, basically.
And Google is really pushing Google Lens as an app. In fact, LG also sent me a follow-up email because it was announced on stage today. That dedicated home button that we were talking about. I mean, the dedicated Google Assistant button on the G7.
If you hold it, right?
If you double tap
right.
it will launch Google Lens.
That's right.
And I think more and more manufacturers will be coming out with some sort of physical hardware or easy trigger for Google Lens on their smartphones.
I mean, Huawei has had the PDF feature for the camera for a while now, where you can take a photo of a business card or a document,
it automatically
PDFies it. Basically, it straightens it out and it fixes the geometry so everything looks right.
And you can do that too on the Notes app on the iPhone. No, on the iPhone and the iPad.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. I thought you were talking about I thought you meant the Galaxy Note, because I think it has a feature like that too. Yeah. But I mean, it's been around. It's just that now we're going to see this part of the suite of Google Apps.
Right.
Which, as we know, is going to work on any Android phone, not just a select few. So I think that's pretty awesome.
I'm not sure if it was part of the Lens announcement, but they talked about clothing match or style match, I think it was called.
Or what?
And I think it was about, pointing to at fashion and getting matches based on your preferences and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, you can point a photo at like of an outfit, and then, it can give you some similar outfits in
and then I think it knows eventually knows what you like, and it can match you with clothes, etc., etc.
It's a mad world we live in. Other things,
maps.
Speaking of awesome, camera based things, they showed us a new version of Google Maps where if, normally you have the blue dot, and on phones that support it, which is most flagships today, you have that the blue cone of doom, as I like to call it. It shows you, it uses the magnetometer, which is the compass, to kind of point the cone in the general angle
direction that you're supposed to be walking.
But if you don't understand the map, or you don't know, you're not familiar with the map, while it's showing you where you're pointing on the map, how do you relate to that in real life? Right?
And I love the example, and it's something that I do all the time, right? I walk like 10 steps, see if my dot moves, and
exactly.
Confirm.
And we all do that.
We
all do that.
Right.
Especially when it's not in the car, but when we're walking, we all do, like, we're walking one way. Oh, no, it's the other way.
Right.
And so what they showed is that if you hold up Google Maps, like,
it's almost like AR mode, right?
Yeah, you basically, like, you lift the phone towards you as if you were going to take a photo, and Google Maps kind of stays flat, and the viewfinder kind of comes into view, pardon the pun, and you now have an AR view of the world.
And they will have these arrows.
And basically points you in the direction where you should be looking or going. But going meaning looking, because you're looking through the camera at an AR thing.
And it's funny because this augmented reality, they were showing almost like restaurant listings that were floating in the air. Layers of...
So Layar, the app, Layar, like 5-6 years ago, what did that? It was an dedicated app where you could just hold your phone and it will show you there's a Starbucks in that direction. And so this is kind of now built in, would be
and
built into Google Maps.
And that's where it would make sense, where AR would really make sense. They were also toying with the idea of, I'm sure it's just a fun idea right now, but of a virtual dog as well.
Oh yeah, like
a
fox or some creature that
was like follow the fox.
Follow the fox.
Yeah, follow the fox.
And so I because I'm a bit of a a troublemaker, I immediately said, "Oh, like Clippy in Microsoft."
That's exactly who I was thinking. Paperclip, yeah.
So it could go very wrong. I hope it doesn't, but no, it's cool. And I think the other thing that they mentioned, that kind of like the stuff that happens behind the scenes to make this work better than AR did back in the day, and any AR app that superimposes over a map does, is that they use this new technology that, in addition to the GPS, which is a global positioning system using satellites and cell phone triangulation, cell tower, and the Wi-Fi triangulation as well, to locate you. The way they're locating you now with the camera is using something called VPS, which is Visual Position System. And what it does is that it knows by using the machine learning and analyzing the image in real time, it can determine what building you're looking at, or what street corner, what street sign, like all the content of the image.
So even if you're in this GPS trap of buildings.
So it has an idea where you are, and it can use that as an additional positional system, and it's much more accurate because you can, most with cameras, especially dual cameras, you get depth perception, and now, or the dual pixel camera on the Pixel 2, you can now actually, not only can you recognize objects, but you can measure distances. And so now you can tell with down to much higher accuracy where the person is.
I think
if they're willing to point the camera at something.
That's my only problem, is that it just doesn't feel natural to have your phone up, because you want to be looking at where you're going. And so, but at the same time,
but in this AR scenario, it would kick in.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
You would have to have these.
It's not necessary to. I don't see a mode where they ask you to take a photo.
Yeah.
I see a mode where the moment you do the gesture to kind of go into the AR version of Google Maps, boom, it actually helps you locate you even more accurately, instantly.
Right.
Because
and they did talk about real time in reference to Google Maps as well as to Google Vision. All of these stuff is real time. It doesn't have to. You don't have to send the photo to the cloud.
It's all in the phone, which is kind of like the detection of music that the Pixel has, which is still uncannily good. I've had my Pixel for over 6 months now, and I'm like, every time a song pops up in the notification tray of whatever's playing, like in the background, barely audible in the crowd, I'm like, how does it do it so well and so quickly and so accurately in all this noise? It's just amazing.
All of these stuff, I think, are they complete products yet? Maybe not. There's a lot of work to be done. But I am excited about, being able to solve everyday problems and the creative and innovative solutions that, people have come up with, and that's why we're here at Google I/O, right?
This is what this show is all about. It's a developer conference first and foremost. They give us, the media, a lot of access, which is awesome. But, a lot of it's not very typically a place where you're going to see new hardware or some major announcements that have, a very clear deadline. I didn't put it in the show notes in the topics that I sent you, but they did launch one thing today that was real and available right away, and that was a new news app, Google News or whatever.
It feels like it's almost the timing of it, right? In this world of fake news, they called it their way of giving value to quality journalism.
Yeah, I think they were trying to be nice to us.
Yes.
Because they were really courting us on that one.
Yes.
But look, it's great because right now there's 2 apps from Google for news. There's News and Weather, and there's Google Play Newsstand. And Newsstand, the idea was more of a magazine style stand. You pick your like Flipboard, you pick subscriptions to different streams, and it surfaces them. And whereas News and Weather just kind of self-curates and also, gives you weather. The News and Weather app is old now, and the Newsstand is newer, but it's more personalized and not necessarily as, it's not auto-curated as well, because it doesn't have access to all the same sources. So think of this as a mashup of the two and a new interface. And I think it is overdue because I have both on most of my phones. And I always ask myself, why do I have 2 news apps from the same company?
Right.
Part
of me feels this is also a reaction to Facebook.
Right.
And all the mixed bag that you get of news sources or quote unquote news sources when you are perusing your feed. At least this is a place to go, and the links are kind of like vouched for.
Right.
Great sources of content, which is maybe something nice to have in this day and age, if you believe, if you agree with the way that they curate.
Yeah, and we'll see how that pans out, right? Because Facebook has curated for us, and that was a bit of a disaster. So I'm hoping Google can do a better job.
Yeah.
But look, I think I'm excited because it actually is a product that launched and is available now. And so, as an aside, while it's a developer conference and usually a lot of stuff isn't announced to like now there, it's nice to have a few things like the Android P beta and like the news app, and no hardware this time, but we knew that. I mean, I/O hasn't been a hardware launch platform for quite a while.
Yeah.
I think they're past that. I mean, the last time they launched a lot of hardware was the Pixel, the Nexus Q.
Yeah.
Remember the Nexus Q?
Yep.
I still have one. It's so cool. It's going to be a collectible in a few years.
Hold on to it.
So there was that, and the original Nexus 7.
This was way long ago.
Yeah, this is 2012 or 13 or something. Yeah. And so the point is that this is not what Google I/O is about now. I think for a while it became kind of like the big Google event of the year.
Yeah.
But it lost the, hey, this is a conference for developer aspect. I mean, I think it had it, but it was such a dog and pony show that we journalists lost track of all the other stuff, the stuff we just spent some time discussing, which really matters to developers.
Right.
And so they're back to that in the last few years.
Well, I mean, even in this podcast, you were able to kind of dive in to explain some of the inner workings of this technology, but you can also the beauty of it for me is that the average person doesn't even have to think or care about any of that because the practical applications, but it's also nice for us to go in and appreciate all that, all that technology and I don't know how you want to describe it, but all that smarts that goes into making all of it happen for everyday users.
And it's so what I like is that the keynotes and stuff kind of focus more on like the features, the new things that Google has brought to the table. And then, if you go to the sessions and you stay for the presentations on the main stage later in the day, they dive in deeper into, as developers, how can you leverage all this new stuff we put in there?
I was in one of these sessions where they introduced us to the quote-unquote heroes. There were a couple of them. One that stood out to me was this girl who developed an app using some of that technology to detect whether a plant is sick or not.
Oh, wow.
And so you can point it in real time. It'll tell you the health of your plant based on... It was very complex, her explanation to me, but... ones and zeros and comparing it with records. But it was interesting because at first it was like, she was like, I first developed this for people like you who like to do gardening at home so you can see how your plant is doing and get attention if necessary. But then she was like, but I realized too that I've added a whole bunch of crops now because people in developing countries, farmers that don't have resources or access, they can go in and also study the health of their crops. And I was like, this is there's cool. So many big problems that they can find solutions to that Google has nothing to do with, but they just give you the platform.
They give you the tools.
Yeah, the tools. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of tools, one of the most exciting announcements for me as an ex-developer, I shouldn't say ex, I still develop for fun, but as an ex-professional developer, is that we now have Linux support in Chrome OS. And I think, it sounds very nerdy and what does it really mean? And so I wanted to kind of like go over that really quickly with people. So you have to remember, Chrome OS is based on Linux, right? That's the quickest way to make an OS today is to start with Linux. Android is based on Linux, and it's optimized for mobile and touch. And Chrome OS is based on Linux, but it's optimized for desktop experience centered around a single web browser. In this case, Google Chrome. So for a long time, that's what it was. And then in the last few years, we've seen the addition of support for Android apps on some devices. And, why not? Android does run on x86 architecture devices and on ARM, and so does Chrome. So it's a good fit. It gives you a bit of native, application support for the times you're not online on a Chromebook. And, with relatively easy to manage security because you go through the App Store and with all of its security stuff. The one thing that made Chrome OS so awesome in the early days is that if you had an internet connection, you never ever had to worry about any kind of weird, you didn't have to worry about the security aspects of your device. You'd get, every now and then you'd see an icon pop up on your Chromebook that would say, hey, next time you restart, I'll apply the update.
Right.
Because it's, as most of them are SSD based, they'd reboot in 10 seconds and you were updated.
Right.
So you never had to wait for installs, and like on Windows or Mac OS where it can take a while.
Yeah.
And so that made Chrome OS extremely low maintenance, and you can log out and give it to someone else. They can log in, and all their environment, the entire Google app suite is available to them, and all their settings and preferences and privacy and all that, password and autofill and everything. So there's a lot of merits to that, but Chromebooks have become pretty awesome, and there's still a few things missing. And the biggest one, if you think about it, is if you are writing code for iOS, if you're a developer for iPhone and iPad, what do? You buy a Mac because Apple forces you to buy a Mac to use Xcode, and that's their prerogative. Why not? And the Mac is a nice platform. We both use Macs. We love them, and so all this time we've been coding for Android using PCs, Windows, sometimes Linux, and sometimes Mac OS. But you could never do it on a Chromebook.
Right.
Yet the Chromebook is Linux.
Right.
And it didn't make sense. So it was only a matter of time as to how long is it going to be before Google lets you use their own tool, their own OS, their own desktop OS to be a developer for Android. And so Linux on Chrome OS facilitates that. It basically makes it possible for people to develop on a Chromebook. But they went beyond that. They decided, hey, why don't we let you code anything? Like Linux comes with a set of tools and a shell and a bunch of other stuff that lets you code right out of the box. And they had removed all that basically from Chrome OS for security and ease of use reasons. But they put it basically back in, and it's sandbox, so it's safe in terms of security. Right. And you can now play with that sandbox, and not only can you create code for Android, but you can code for Linux, which means it'll run on a Chromebook. And so technically you can write a native app for a Chromebook if you want to.
Which is
you can't publish it anywhere because there's no app store or whatever. And I think Chrome OS is not really about apps anyway. That's what the Android apps are for in Chrome. It's a little complex, but I think that it's still nice because, say right now you want to you like your Chromebook because it's light and versatile because it can run Android apps or whatever, and you're traveling. And you're a developer, you always had to bring along a PC or a Mac in addition to the Chromebook, or decide to leave your Chromebook at home. And now you can properly just use the Chromebook if you want to, and you can write some stuff in Linux. And then when you get home on your PC or Mac, you can continue. Right. Like you're not stuck anymore. Right. And I think that's a huge announcement.
It's very interesting because when we first saw the Chromebooks, they were really meant either for the education space as a really basic, a computer at its most basic levels. And then now, as you can see, the Chromebook kind of really mature as a product. It is no longer just a device for play or for basic use, but for developing
I think, in the early days, I think the Chromebook was, targeting three markets. It was targeting primarily education. It was also targeting business, like enterprises, where you want to reduce the cost of IT, and it radically reduces it because there's no maintenance. Right. And devices can be passed on from people to people without having to worry about losing any content or anything. And then the third group that was never explicitly kind of targeted, but we all knew was an easy target and obvious target was us. Right. Writers, bloggers, journalists, people who spend most of the time in a CMS or web interface to write. Right. And don't necessarily do need like heavy lifting in terms of app. They might need a bit of video editing and a bit of photo editing, but they can do basic stuff on the web. And honestly, that's how I fell in love with the Chromebook, because I could create a very distraction-free environment that was very low maintenance, that was lightweight and affordable and cheap and almost disposable, because if I lost the thing, it didn't matter because they couldn't log in as me anyway.
Right.
And all my stuff was in the cloud, so who cares, right? So that's kind of why I think we loved it as tech nerd, journalist, blogger.
But you as a developer.
But as a developer, I always missed that other side.
Yeah.
So they brought that back in, and it's an interesting way of doing it. I haven't played with it, so I don't know exactly the nitty-gritty detail on how they're implementing it. My biggest question, and I think Ron Amedeo of Ars Technica was, we were talking today, and he was like, I'm going to a session tomorrow. Do you have any, does anybody have any questions about Linux, technical question about Linux on Chrome OS? And I said, for me, the biggest question is how they're going to maintain this absolutely bulletproof security and privacy, that they're doing with Chrome OS right now, once they open it up to you coding on Linux. And I'm pretty sure sandboxing is the answer, but I want to find out more technically how they're making that possible, right? And that's going to be actually interesting. They might be using virtual machines or whatever else to make it happen, but we'll see. The bottom line is, if you are not a developer, you still should be excited, because you can learn. You can now one day decide, I want to learn to code, and you can do it
from your Chromebook.
And or you can say, I want to write my first Android app, and you no longer have to find a Mac or Windows machine to do it. So for some people, Chrome OS is the only OS, it's the only machine, because it's their cheap computers too. So that's all maybe they can afford.
Right.
So I think it opens development to a whole new demographic. And the other thing is, all those schools that spent money on Chromebooks can now teach development.
Right.
Boom. That's a huge step. Right.
Sounds great.
So yeah, so that's it for that.
Yeah, there's a couple of other interesting things.
Let's talk about the Google Assistant call thing.
They call it Google Duplex is what they call it?
Duplex, yeah.
Duplex.
So I was a little confused with the demos, because the first one sounded pretty good to me, and the second one sounded pretty bad to me, and I couldn't quite figure out which side was the assistant. I think it was the one on the left.
No, yes.
But let's explain.
So I was like, well, I'm glad I recorded the whole thing. So they were like, just think of a better sounding, more human-like version of Google Assistant. By the way, we missed this, but Google Assistant will now come with 5 different voices, including John Legend.
I know.
Believe it or not.
Which is cool.
But the Google Assistant, let's just say you asked Google Assistant to book a hairdresser appointment for you. And Google Assistant did sound, that was sounded more natural, right?
Yeah.
But apparently they were saying this is a real call. They were like, this really happened. This is a real recording. And they were able to understand context, and it was smart enough so that they could banter with the person on the other line.
Yeah.
And if that person was being finicky, they were still kind of able to pick up those context clues and proceed with booking that hairdresser appointment.
Yeah. So the two examples where we see Google this Google Duplex an assistant, so they didn't get into the details, but the idea is, I guess you would tell Google Assistant, I'm not going to use a keyword because I don't want to trigger everybody, but you'd say your keyword and you'd say, please book me a hairdresser's appointment at, Castro Hairdressers at 2 p.m. on Monday.
Yeah.
And it would then place a call by itself in a human voice, that's the voice of Google Assistant, to the company that you just asked them to call, and book the appointment verbally and interact with that
person on the other end.
They showed us the recordings of that. And the first one was booking hairdresser appointment, and that went pretty well.
Yes.
The human at the other end was good at their job, competent, and it went quickly, and you could see how Google picked up, and it was very, very amazing.
And then there would be little things like
yeah,
so that the person on the other end would have no idea that it was speaking to a machine.
Which brings up a whole ethical question, honestly. Yes. And I want to get into it right now, but let's talk about it in a second. The other thing the second call, though, the person at the other end
was calling a Chinese restaurant. I think
the person at the other end had an accent and wasn't very good.
Wasn't good at English.
At English, and also clearly not as willing to spend the time and energy on that call, right? Like, I wouldn't say they were incompetent, but they were just not invested in their job, clearly, and not paying attention to the information that we're given on terms of time and schedule and stuff. But the assistant or the duplex
was
very
smart enough to handle that more complex situation. Yeah. So much so that he wasn't able to get a booking because at the end she basically said, if you're just a party of 4 on a Tuesday, there are not a lot of people, you can just come.
Right. But it was interesting that, she made mistakes in repeating the dates and times that he asked for, but the assistant kind of like tried to bring her back on track.
And was able to identify it
was pretty freaking amazing, to be honest with you.
They did, these are the more of the successful ones. They did admit that some of their trials didn't go so well, but I mean, this was one of my biggest complaints when personal assistants became a thing, because I was like, I would really love to have an executive assistant, right? So if they could do more things for you than just give you what's on your schedule or remind you of something.
It's pretty amazing. Yes. And honestly, I think that it was almost uncanny valley, because you're like, if I had known, I would have told you at the end that thinking it was the person on the left, which was the duplex, the assistant, was the nicest, most polite, and most proficient person. Yeah, right? Yeah. They were like, that call with the Chinese restaurant, that was a patient person. Yep. Because that customer person, the restaurant person wasn't not really helpful at all. So that was kind of interesting. And
almost scary.
So that brings up that ethical issue. It's like, I think we're going to get to a point where, like, will we, should we have a system in place where you have to disclose that you're an assistant calling versus a human? Right. And first of all, does it matter? Secondly, if it does matter, should it become regulated in some way? I mean, I know we're far from that, but these are questions that Google has got to be asking themselves. Because if you look at, I really don't believe that Silicon Valley does this a lot. And I mean, like, Silicon Valley, the industry, not the show. The show is awesome. But I'm talking about, there is this kind of disease in the Valley where you ask for forgiveness, not permission. Right. And it was very exemplified by Uber. But, Snapchat's done it. Recently, the little electric scooter rental places that, companies that are available in San Francisco.
What's it called? There were a lot of it in LA.
There's 3 of them. I can never remember the names.
Bird is one of them.
Exactly. I mean, the point is that they just deployed these things, and then the city of San Francisco, I can't speak for what's happening in LA with it, but in San Francisco, it caused a lot of chaos.
It's like trash.
It's caused a lot of problems, and the city had to kind of find a way to regulate it, and they were put on the spot. And I hate that attitude. I think, on one hand, I understand the disruptive nature of Silicon Valley, but on the other hand, I feel like, we have a responsibility, as especially those of us who are working in tech and those of us who write about tech, to kind of call them on this, because it's like, look, you can't just disrupt stuff randomly and not worry about what's going to happen. The you have a responsibility. Yeah. You have so much power right now. Yeah. So with great power comes great responsibility. So I feel like there's an ethical question there. I'm not sure what side I'm on, honestly. Part of me says, well, what does it matter if the interaction goes well? Right. I mean, humans are terrible. I've had customer service calls where I was a real bitch because I was so cranky about something. Yeah. And I'm sure that an assistant would be a much nicer experience for the person at the other end. So perhaps there is no ethical issue here. But at the same time, I feel like, you're a human, you're going to be talking to an assistant. And what if, and we haven't talked about this yet, what if it's an assistant and at the other end it's another assistant? And, obviously it doesn't matter. They can handshake. But I was joking around today, and I want to put this in the podcast because it's hilarious. I think I was talking with one of the folks from Android Central or Mobile Nations, same thing. Yeah. But I think it was, Andrew Martonic, I think. And we were nerding out, and I said, what would be amazing? Like if it's two assistants, they start talking, and then, like they talk faster and faster, and all of a sudden, like you start hearing the modem sound, like, and they don't have to talk anymore. Like they're like, and 2 seconds later, the phone, the call hangs up because in computer speak, it took them 2 seconds to resolve the thing. They don't have to use words anymore. Like, I think that would be so nerdy, but I mean, like, how is it going to work out? Like, to me, I think it would make much more sense if you're an assistant and you're calling a landline or like a cell phone line to a business or shop, and there's an assistant there, that somehow the two have a little signal in the voice that tells each other, hey, we're assistants. Why don't we like not waste our time on this call and talk over the internet really fast? I can just handshake and boom, we resolve this thing, right? Because that makes a way more sense to me. So because I'm a nerd and a developer, to me that's
I'm sure there are a lot of issues there too. We would need more time to really think this out and also use it and see how we feel about it, but definitely think it's a conversation that needs to be had.
One last thing that we've got on the topics on the notes. I'll put all of these things we've discussed obviously are going to be in show notes in great detail. So is Gmail Smart Compose. And so the reason I got excited is, again, as a developer, if you code and you're in a command line, usually you can hit tab to autocomplete the command you're typing. Mm-hmm. It's contextual, but it works really well. It saves you from having to make spelling mistakes when you have to write code, right? And so Google, being nerds as they are, have basically come up with a thing in a future version of Gmail. And this is obviously the Gmail probably on Chrome OS or like on the web, because it requires a tab button. Yeah. So any keyboard with a tab button with this version of Gmail, if you're composing a message, when you hit tab, it auto-completes the current sentence based on context. Using AI. Yep. And it's uncannily the demo.
It's strange. I was like, how do you know what I was going to say?
It is exactly
how
like
did
that.
you know it? And sometimes it's so scary because we joke about this all the time, like Google knows everything, right? Yeah. And I'm sure they do. But this is kind of crazy. But, I mean, this is all about life hacking, right?
Right.
I mean, we have these shortcuts to autocomplete, things that we fill up a lot, email addresses, our home address, common phrases that we use for pleasantries in an email. We can just add these, whether on your smartphone, on your computer. But this is a whole new level because this is
contextual. Like it's looking at the email thread before it that you're replying to, all in context of it, and kind of figures it out. And, I love that it's like a little nod to the tab autocomplete in programming, but it's kind of cool because we are all familiar with autocomplete on a keyboard, and we all use it quite a bit. But this is like kind of like that version on steroids with context. And, half the time, you can obviously delete and continue
it'll basically what
it'll show you in gray beforehand what it's about
what
to
it's
autocomplete.
Thinking, yes.
It's kind of amazing. That kind of blew my mind. Honestly.
Well, as writers, of course, this is not going to help with our writing, but I don't like emails, and I hate writing emails.
It's fast.
And so this is fast. And I mean, you talked about autocomplete on a keyboard. Yeah. I've been so spoiled sometimes that when I'm not using one of those autocomplete keyboards, my mind can't kind of make sense. Why is it so difficult to text all of a sudden? Because you're so reliant on this autocomplete keyboard. I know. Just imagine what writing emails are going to be like. It's a product that it's already rolling out.
It is rolling out.
Yes, it's rolling out with the new Gmail.
Okay.
Users, you might not see it yet, but it's appearing in the next few weeks. So
I think it's going to be really interesting because honestly, Google already has all the information. You can complain all you want. This is already in there. Yeah. It's just this is taking that information and giving you, the user, some value. I'm wondering how many maybe I shouldn't say bad, but how many lazy journalists are going to use this feature to compose stories in their email client and have it all complete stuff. Let's see what happens.
We can see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, it would be nice to try to write an article using.
It would be fun.
The feature, by the way, is called Smart Compose.
Smart Compose. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. All right. Well, listen. I think we've talked about pretty much everything that was at least announced on day one of I/O.
Yeah.
There might be more tomorrow, but I want you to tell people where they can find you online. Like, tell them about your Twitter handle and all that good stuff.
Well, my personal Twitter handle is Michael Josh, just my name. Same thing for Instagram.
Easy.
But of course, I'd love for you to go check out GadgetMatch.com, GadgetMatch on YouTube, and GadgetMatch on Instagram.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, you guys are one of the premier Asia-based
yes, we're trying to cover global, but give you an Asian perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. There's a lot happening out of Asia, and we try to.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know where to find me, folks. I'm at ThankGirl, TNKGRL on Twitter. That's like the comic book character without the vowels. And, you can find me on Instagram on the same handle. You can find me on YouTube as youtube.com/Miriam Jouar. That's my full name spelled out, Miriam with a Y. My YouTube channel is really a compliment to this podcast. So if you want to see what a G7 looks like, you want to get, an idea of what my hands-on with the G7 was, that's where you'll find it. And so the other thing I want to point out is, mobiletechpodcast.com is the URL for the podcast. Please subscribe, tell your friends, share the news. I want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible is probably the best at this point platform for audiobooks. And if you love books and you don't have time to read them in your life and you need to listen to them, this is the place to go. Lately I've been binging on old William Gibson novels. Prior to that, I did the latest Star Wars, which is an 11-hour-long audiobook, which is insane. But you're an Audible.
I'm an Audible user. Sometimes I think as my attention gets harder and harder to focus, I've found it difficult to read a book sometimes. And so, for my long commutes, I sometimes just choose to get the Audible version of a book so that it can be read to me. And then I find that's an easier way for me to finish a book than having to strain the eyes and read.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes as usual. If you click on that link, you're not going to get a special deal or anything, but you will support the podcast, which I think is very important. And so the link is audibletrial.com/mobiletech. That's audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Please go support Audible, the best audiobook platform on the web. So stay tuned for more. I'll definitely have a guest next week, but there might be another second podcast this week. So stay tuned. Yeah, thanks so much, Josh.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time.
And Michael Josh.
Michael Josh.
All of the above.
The same person.
Yep. Come back soon.
Mm-hmm. And let's enjoy the rest of I/O, huh?
Indeed. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with ThankGirl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.